Welcome to another False Swipe gaming film. It's been said that you should have nothing you're not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner. But when you venture into Sinnoh Stark Mountain, the heat is everywhere, largely courtesy of today's Pokemon, Heatran. One of Pokemon's most intriguing designs, it boasts a fittingly unique typing to go along with its inspiration of the Earth's inner core, and a fire monster born of volcanic remains. Many disagree on what type of animal Heatran is actually supposed to be. Many call it some sort of frog, but trying to distill it like that just seems wrong. It is uniquely a Pokemon. Today we'll be examining if Heatran was able to survive the competitive Pokemon scene, one that is comparable in its ruthlessness to the shootout in Heat. And so we ask, how great was Heatran actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Early in Diamond and Pearl, Heatran, while not outright dismissed, didn't leave too much of a favorable impression on the player base. Sure, it had great qualities, such as typing filled to the brim with resistances, and a monstrous special attack stat to deliver always useful Fire Stab from, especially since its Fierce Fire Stab didn't come with the drawback of a Stealth Rock weakness thanks to its half-steel typing, but many players focus on the fact its weaknesses were to several of the most common attacking types in the game: ground, fighting, and water. In conjunction with Heatran's low speed, relative to the speedy new threats Generation 4 introduced like Garchomp and Infernape. However, Heatran quickly grew on the player base. With its aforementioned useful typing in conjunction with great bulk, it found plenty of switch-in opportunities, and that initially maligned speed stat was actually quite decent, easily getting the jump on the many bulky, mid-range Pokemon found in the metagame. Plus, if it chose to run Choice Scarf, it could outrun even offensive Pokemon. Once Heatran was in, not much wanted to take its hits, as its powerful Fire Stat was complemented by an excellent special attacking move pool. Earth Power was a staple move to ensure it wasn't walled by opposing Heatran, while also hitting Tyranitar hard and allowing Scarf sets to reliably threaten Infernape. The neutral coverage against other common fire resists like water types and the aforementioned Chomp was also quite useful, since it hit quite decently off that great special attack stat. It was a great example of how Heatran, even when it wasn't hitting its mark with exact precision, had the strength and coverage to scatter solid chip damage on the opposing team, damage which its teammates appreciated greatly in their efforts to clean up. After its chosen Fire Stab and Earth Power, there were several great ways Heatran could fill out its move pool. With Hidden Power Grass, it destroyed Swampert while also hitting Suicune and Starmie much harder. Hidden Power Electric hit the latter too and missed out on Pert for the bonus of clocking Gyarados. With Dragon Pulse, Heatran could punish Salamence and Garchomp switching. Later in Platinum, once Chomp was gone, Dragon Pulse became even more valuable to hit the newcomer Latias, as well as the Flygon and Kingdra that had increased in popularity. Finally, with Explosion, Heatran could take down just about anything with it, most notably the wall that it otherwise withstand its attacks, Blissey. Heatran didn't just have to use attacking moves either. It had plenty of excellent utility options to mess with the opponent. It was a fantastic user of Toxic, since no Steel or Poison types wanted to switch into it, and could thus spam the move to hinder its switch-ins. In a similar vein, it also extracted a ton of value from Will-O-Wisps. Again, the few Pokemon immune to the move didn't want to switch into Heatran, and not only was Burn's passive damage a significant hindrance to the Pokemon that did switch into it, the attack drop was utterly ruinous to several such Pokemon, as they liked targeting Heatran with physical moves such as Earthquake. Heatran could also go for such burns while still attacking for decent damage thanks to Lava Plume's hefty 30% burn rate. What about bulky Pokemon that wanted to heal off its damage and or status? Heatran shut them down with Taunt. Heatran could even take advantage of the many switch-in opportunities its typing and bulk afforded it to support its team with Stealth Rock, becoming one of the most reliable users of the move in the game. That was just the tip of the iceberg too. Heatran was also an outstanding user of Substitute, scouting switches, protecting itself from revenge killers, and potentially racking up passive damage. It could also do the latter with Protect. Roar was another fantastic weapon in its arsenal, deadly alongside the spikes that dug into its checks. It even occasionally used Metal Sound to wreak utter havoc on defense, blasting through everything and forcing switches simultaneously. It seemed like there was no move Heatran couldn't make work somehow. Later on, we'll even explore how it used Torment. Regardless of what it chose, it was excellent, and it could mix and match to its liking. This applied to its items too. The speed of Choice Scarf, the overwhelming power of Choice Specs, the immense power with move flexibility of Life Orb, the longevity of Leftovers, the ability to nullify one of its weaknesses with Shuka, Chople, or Pachot Berry. Even less popular items like Expert Belt, Lumberry, and Custat Berry could be and were used to great effect by Heatran. It was so good it could even set Stealth Rock on its Scarf set, since it had the moveset flexibility and forced so many switches. Heatran was both great on his own and as a part of offensive and defensive combinations. It was a favorite part partner of many offensive pokes thanks to its ability to bait in and destroy several shared checks. For example, Calm Mind Sweepers love Heatran's ability to ruin Blissey, especially if it used its signature move Magma Storm to ensure Blissey couldn't run away from the explosion. While all manner of offensive threats enjoyed how effortlessly Heatran switched into and ruined early staples of Diamond and Pearl defense, Cresselia, Spiritomb, and Weezing, even punishing the latter two for using Will-O-Wisp with its Flash Fire ability boosting its fire moves into even more terrifying territory. Defensively, Heatran's many resistances were the stuff of legend. It became famous for pairing with Celebi since together, the Celatran combination as it was called, resisted every single type in the game except Rock. Heatran was already a hugely important Pokemon in Diamond and Pearl, but once Platinum came around, it became one of the best around. Its Choice Scarf set was often touted as the anti-metagame Pokemon for how it checked several of the most dangerous threats in the metagame. This started in the early Platinum meta when Shaman Sky was wreaking havoc, but even after Skyman was banned, Scarftran continued to hold this title for its reliability in checking the likes of Gengar and Swords Dance Lucario. It also loved the new Rotom forms that were absolutely everywhere, spamming their Will-O-Wisp for it to grab a free Flash Fire boost against. When Latias was unbanned and Scizor became the #1 most used Pokemon in the tier, with Jirachi rising in usage as well, Heatran really dug its heels in and earned that anti-metagame reputation. It had the unique quality of both resisting Dragon and of being able to destroy the other steel types that were used for their ability to resist Dragon, making it valuable on both defense and offense, and to make matters even better, it was the only Pokemon in the game to resist the combination of both Dragon and Fire. Heatran's role in Platinum wasn't just that of a great Scarfer, of course. It was anti-metagame in pretty much every role it went with. Most notably with Life Orb, it was one of the most reliable stall breakers, while the Subtoxic set completely turned the tables on one of its most viable checks, Vaporeon. This extended to the lead metagame too. Metagross had become a popular offensive lead for its ability to take on the metagame's many Focus Sash leads. Azelf, Aerodactyl, and with a Lumberry, Roserade and Smeargle, while with an Octoberry it took on Infernape. Meanwhile, defensive teams loved leading off with Skarmory and Fortress for early spikes. Finally, Scarf Jirachi was a popular lead for its ability to Iron Head flinch its way past Azelf, Aerodactyl, Roserade, and Smeargle, while being able to use Trick to unleash its Choice Scarf on bulkier leads. Thus, Heatran had an amazing matchup spread against the steel-heavy lead metagame. It made Jirachi, Skarmory, and Fortress run in terror, denying the pressure of early spikes from the latter two, and crucially giving its team more room to breathe while trying to break through the opponent's defenses, and with Shukaberry beating even the rare Aqua variants of lead Metagross. Heatran also had a solid matchup against lead Azelf and could set on Roserade leads as well, making it one of the most consistent choices to start a game off, which was an incredible trait to have. Heatran's lead set adapted over time as well. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, once Dragonite and Machamp leads became popular, Heatran began using choice specs in the lead slot. Its monstrously powerful Overheat blasted through Machamp's bulk, as well as KOing Metagross through the Octoberry, while its boosted Dragon Pulse surprised Dragonite for a KO as well, and it also ripped through unsuspecting Swampert leads with Hidden Power Grass. Even this set eventually saw variation. Life Orb Overheat was still strong enough to blast Machamp and Octogross apart, and freeing Heatran of the Specs set's move restriction freed it once again to take up the mantle of reliable Stealth Rocker. Specs and Life Orb Heatran's effect on the metagame was such that it was a significant contributor to Machamp's leads beginning to run Focus Sash to survive their Overheat, so some players took a different approach to beating Machamp with Heatran. They would load Heatran with enough HP and defense to survive Machamp's Dynamic Punch and subsequent Bullet Punch, and equipped it with a Lumberry so it wouldn't be thwarted by Dynamic Punch's confusion. Since Heatran's stats were so great, it still had plenty of EVs after the requisite bulk benchmark. The fact that it didn't just live Dynamic Punch, but it lived so effortlessly that it was easily able to outrun even max speed Champ, 2-hit KO it with Magma Storm, and still have some EVs left over was particularly amazing. Heatran also made perfect use of Magma Storm on this set, ensuring that Machamp couldn't run away from being 2-hit KO'd. And since no guard applied to all Pokemon in battle, Heatran didn't have to worry about missing. Magma Storm also worked wonderfully against Roserade leads, in conjunction with the Lumberry to shrug off Sleep Powder, and the chip damage would finish it off after it had been brought down to its Focus Sash. Incidentally, the standard Shukartran was also lead Machamp's #1 most used partner. Machamp leads lost to Lumberry Metagross, which Heatran switched into and scared out for easy Stealth Rock. Since we're on the subject of unusual options Heatran pulled off effortlessly, now is the time to go over the aforementioned Torment, a move pretty much nothing else has used competitively. So why did Heatran use it so effectively? Well, the basic idea was that thanks to Heatran's amazing typing, most Pokemon are only going to have one move that can actually hit it. In conjunction with Protect and Substitute, Tormentran can lock opponents out of said move and proceed to dominate them, especially if they were choice locked, since they would be forced to struggle. And what was Heatran often paired with? Latias and Rotom appliances, who would trick choice items onto the opponent, locking them into moves Heatran could safely sub against and begin its reign of terror. With the help of passive damage from its teammates, Tormentran was one of the most infuriating, potentially automatic win Pokemon in the game, easily capable of dominating entire teams, especially since Lava Plume burns were ruinous to would-be checks like Taunt Gyarados, Roost Salamence, and Roar Swampert. After Latias and Salamence were banned, Scizor finally ceased to be the #1 most used Pokemon in the metagame. What took its place? None other than Heatran. Once the anti-metagame Pokemon, it was now the face of the metagame, completely shaping the tier around it. In the wake of the Dragon bans, the style of Fire, Water, Grass cores that were dominant in the nearly dragonless UU became the newly defining style of OU, and since OU's other fire type, Infernape, had nearly no ability to switch into opposing attacks, Heatran was by far the most popular fire type piece of that core. Its most common set was the Shuka Berry Stealth Rocker, except now it was used more outside the lead slot than in the lead slot. A beacon of consistency and effectiveness on a game-to-game basis, allowing it to take everything from Calm Mind Jirachi's Hidden Power Ground to Life Orb Shaman's Earth Power to Scarf Flygon's Earthquake. It began experimenting more with Pastro Berry variants, both on its Stealth Rock and Anti-Stall Magma Storm Trapper variants. Of course, it being Heatran, sometimes it combined these sets into one. Pastro was huge for turning the tables on Starmie and Offensive Suicune. The former's Life Orb set had exploded in popularity in the wake of the Latias ban since it shredded Fire, Water, Grass cores, and the bulky set was being used specifically because it had a good matchup against standard Shukatran, while the latter had become popular during the late stages of the Dragon era and had firmly become a metagame standard after their ban. Heatran being able to take them on one-on-one was game-changing, as was its ability to stay in on other huge water-type threats like Kingdra, Empoleon, and Gyarados. Incidentally, special attacking water types like Offensive Suicune were particularly popular on the same team as Heatran, as they loved its supporting Blissey destroying talents, which opened them up to crush bulky squads, especially since by running HP Electric ensured that Rest Talk Gyarados popular on stall wouldn't be able to counter it instead. These anti-water qualities also made Heatran an amazing partner for OU's other fire, Infernape. Heatran was also a particularly good rocker against such stall teams because their rapid spinner was Fortress, thus easily being able to maintain the hazard to exert constant pressure over the course of the game. Another set that had started gaining popularity in the Dragons meta that completely took off after they were banned was one that would become perhaps Heatran's most iconic cross-generationally, the Specially Defensive set, which established that Heatran could be just as effective, important, and defining a tool for stall teams as much as a tool against them. Its enormous special bulk meant tier-shredding special attacks like Zapdos, Thunderbolt bounced off. Even the likes of Gengar's Focus Blast or various Hydro Pumps, or even the quad-effective Earth Power from opposing offensive Heatran or Life Orb Shaman didn't come close to KOing it, while Heatran's immunities to Sandstorm, Toxic, and Will-O-Wisp meant it was quite difficult to wear down, especially when it used Protect for extra leftovers recovery, and in doing so, it also made the clock tick even faster on the opponents it was wearing down with its own passive damage. Sometimes it even utilized Rest Talk, making it even harder to wear down. Things continued for some time in this vein in the DPP metagame that continued to get played even after the release of Generation 5. Even after player opinions started to shift to the point where Tyranitar and Jirachi were generally considered overall better than Heatran, Heatran still continued to be one of the best, most popular Pokemon around. The Scarf set had mostly disappeared post-Dragon ban, but eventually came roaring back. Its excellence so pronounced that for quite some time, it seemed foolish to use any other set. It was just too good at tearing through offense, while remaining an effective wall breaker against defense thanks to Explosion, a rare valuable trait in a Scarfer. The most common exception was Specs Heatran Balance, which became its own type of archetype. This style enjoyed using defensive cores that controlled the game's pace, slowing the tempo down comfortably enough to where they could get Spectran in and absolutely destroy something. Spectran was also particularly ferocious since Clefable was eclipsing Blissey as the tier's premier special wall, and while its immunity to passive damage made it generally more effective, its bulk couldn't hope to withstand Spectran's obscene power. Eventually, Latias was introduced to the tier, and even before that, Jirachi had shifted to running paralysis-focused Iron Head sets that threatened much of the metagame, particularly because they wore down non-leftovers Heatran quickly, and teams usually weren't too well equipped to handle Jirachi outside of Heatran. These Jirachi sets also liked running Protect, thus neutering any threat Scarf could pose, and Scarf sets wouldn't want to switch into a Pokemon that could paralyze them anyway. Thus, for the sake of longevity, Heatran began running leftovers regularly. This naturally lent itself to a resurgence in defensive sets, which were valuable for staving off the Specs Draco Meteors Latias had reintroduced in the tier. Spadef Heatran initially didn't like the rise of Clefable, which was immune to the passive damage such Heatran sets made their specialty, but all it took was a little adaptation. Spadef Heatran began running Explosion, thus punishing any Clefable that thought it was safe to wall it, providing for the millionth time that whatever tool Heatran wanted to use, it'd be incredibly effective almost regardless of the set. It wasn't just defensive lefties Heatran though, as offensive sets of course made excellent use of leftovers as well. It gave them more longevity in breaking down bulky teams and withstanding light offensive hits, and through this bolstered defensive capability, allowed Heatran to function at its best as an offensive threat. Even at the height of the Dugtrio boom, a phenomenon seemingly tailor-made to destroy Heatran, it was still a fantastic Pokemon. Yes, it could be lured in and removed by Doug, but Heatran was also a tremendous Dugtrio partner. The removal of opposing Tyranitar and Heatran made Heatran immensely threatening in its own right. Plus, Dugtrio turned out to be broken overall and got itself banned. And as soon as it did, Heatran reminded everyone why it was so tremendous. It had gained Eruption as an event move at the end of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but players dismissed it once they saw the move was locked to a speed-lowering Quiet nature. However, Quiet also boosts special attack, and thus after many years, Eruption Specs Heatran was finally used in serious play. Its Overheat already shattered nearly everything, but Eruption was a whole new level of KO button, cleanly deleting so-called resists like Flygon. Players began running Hidden Power Ground, Scarf Magnezone to try and make up for the loss of Dugtrio, which was the effect of unchecked Heatran. This speaks to Heatran's influence on all of Gen 4. Even when something slots in Hidden Power Ground for it, it doesn't do so at no cost. For example, by running HP Ground over Fire, Scarf Zone or Super Rachi lose the ability to beat specially defensive Source Dance Roost Scizor. This leads to yet another of the million ways Heatran can support its team, forcing divided coverage from the opponent. No matter what it did, it was amazing, and its excellence and influence cannot be overstated. Heatran was one of the most defining faces of Generation 4 OU, perhaps the defining face. And we're not done with Gen 4 Heatran yet either. With its specially defensive set, it was also absolutely amazing in Ubers. Its ability to both withstand Draco Meteors, not be threatened by fire coverage, and destroy other steals that withstood Draco Meteors was especially valuable in the dragon-infested Uber tier. Heatran was especially fierce because it received support from Groudon's permanent Sun. This weakened opposing water moves, ensuring Heatran could even stay in against the likes of Palkia, and brought Thunder's accuracy down to a paltry 50%, meaning Heatran was even more better at walling the likes of the Lati twins and Dialga. Boosting the power of its lava plumes was quite valuable as well, but even in rain, Pokemon like Giratina Origin didn't like the risk of getting burned. Giratina didn't exactly lose the prospect of switching into Heatran to replace the sun with rain either. It absolutely hated toxic or a lava plume burn, or getting roared out with hazards down. Heatran was also one of the few Pokemon capable of taking on the terrifying Taunt Will-O-Wisp Mewtwo, and was excellent at using Taunt itself to absolutely ruin popular Uber stall teams. Some of them were so hapless against it, they resorted to running Earthquake Giratina. This was the case for Giratina Origin as well, which was one of the most threatening wall breakers in the game. It would have much preferred to run other moves, but often had to slot Earthquake in lest it get completely ruined by Heatran. For its widespread excellence in just about every matchup and profound effect on the metagame, Heatran was a staple of many of the best Sun teams and one of the best Pokemon in Generation 4 Ubers. There is little information on the Generation 4 years of VGC, especially pre-2010, but from what exists, Heatran seems to have had quite a solid niche and some decent success in 2009. At the Nashville Regional, a player named Raymond, aka Despair, used it alongside Skill Swap Uxie, which gave Heatran Levitate, while Imperfect Luck won the entire tournament with the Heatran. Just like in singles, Heatran's blend of typing and bulk was well suited for doubles for how adroitly it took hits, while its power and coverage made it great at dishing out hits itself, especially since its powerful stab heat wave hit both opponents. However, for some reason, Heatran wasn't seen in the top 4 at Worlds in either division, and there isn't enough information or a sufficient sample size to make any sort of meaningful deduction from this, but we can reasonably say that Heatran had success beforehand and just didn't show up at the end for some reason. We also didn't find any use for Heatran in 2010, which was likely due to not just Kyogre, but also Groudon's Earthquake being everywhere, though Heatran is one of the best Pokemon to have under Groudon's Sun, so it's likely that it did have some sort of role, and the information on it has potentially been lost to time. You might be forgiven for thinking Generation 5 would slow Heatran down, at least for a few seconds. First, it couldn't run Explosion effectively anymore, since the move's power had been nerfed. Second, Game Freak had seemingly gone out of its way to adding multiple threatening new fire types. Third, Permanent Rain was now an OU. Of course, if you thought about it for more than a few seconds, you'd realize Heatrans wouldn't slow down at all, as the metagame was also largely shaping up to be about dragons. If Heatran could handle having to deal with Kyogre in Generation 4 Ubers, Politoed would be no problem at all. Once Once again, Heatran devoured both Dragon Stab and the other steals that devoured the Dragon Stab, most notably a new addition called Ferrothorn. Especially defensive Heatran also partnered incredibly well with Ferrothorn, eating fire attacks aimed at it while Ferrothorn shrugged off water moves with ease. The Ferrotran combination became a staple of spike stacking teams, especially since they also partnered so effectively with the fighting and rapid spin immune Jellicent, who also joined Heatran in dishing out burns. Heatran also famously completely countered one of the scariest Pokemon in the game, Quiver Dance Volcarona. The reason Hidden Power Ground was such a standard on Volcarona was solely because of Heatran, and of course did not come at no cost. In general, it constantly showed off that amazing hit-taking ability it became so well known for, with even super effective attacks bouncing off from Thunderous's Focus Blast to Rotom Wash's Hydro Pump to defense Politoed's rain-boosted Scald. Spadef Heatran alone was one of the best, most important, and popular Pokemon in the tier, a fixture on balanced sand teams and downright required on defensive teams that wanted to go weatherless. It was the primary reason Sun teams pretty much had to use Dugtrio. At least the Sun Sweepers all naturally slammed Tyranitar incredibly hard. They couldn't against Heatran without severely compromising themselves. Of course, Heatran was also amazing on Sun teams itself. Defensively, it was crucial to ensure they didn't instantly get destroyed by Latios, one of their biggest threats, while offensively it was one of their best tools for winning the weather war against rain and sand, quickly reminding the player base it was an offensive threat in its own right. With Magma Storm, whose accuracy had been buffed to Gen 5, it would trap Toad or Tyranitar switching in trying to change the weather. Tyranitar would then become easy prey for its teammate Dugtrio, while Politoed was destroyed by the combination of Sunny Day and Solar Beam. With Air Balloon as its item and Hidden Power Ice in its 4th move slot, Heatran was also a key part of Sun Team's defense against other terrifying dragons, Garchomp and Dragonite, as well as the ever-threatening Landorus. Offensive Balloon Heatran became popular on offensive Sandstorm and Weatherless teams as well. The Balloon was valuable for an extra line of defense against Sandrush Excadrill, whom you could never be too safe against. Plus, as long as it kept its Balloon intact, it even walled the substitute Toxic Protect Gliscor that eventually became popular, and it was safe from Dugtrio trapping it as well. Speaking of avoiding Dugtrio trapping, this was at its most important in early Black and White 2, when Genesect was running around. Heatran was pretty much the only Pokemon in OU capable of taking Genesect on. Sadly, it was one U-turn into Dugtrio away from having this role nullified. With how important especially defensive Heatran was in the metagame, many players' first instinct was to run Shed Shell on it. This of course meant it wouldn't have any recovery since its longevity came from leftovers. The logical next step was to run Rest and Sleep Talk on it to make up for this. Never mind the fact that Gen 5 mechanics meant sleeping Pokemon had their sleep counter reset upon switching out. Nothing else would safely counter Genesect and Dugtrio together, and this was particularly important given how well Genesect fit on Sun teams as a result. So yes, if you run a Spadef Shed Shell Rest Talk Heatran, you would beat Sun teams, but you would have an awful Pokemon in pretty much every other matchup. Standard Spadef Heatran was still quite successful in the Jenna Dug era. You just had to tread incredibly carefully when you saw Dugtrio in Team Preview. The more successful anti-Jenna Dug approach was to bring back a classic Scarf Heatran. If you could get Stealth Rock up to nullify Dugtrio's Focus Sash, then Genesect Sun teams were pretty much up the creek without a paddle, and Scarf Tram was actually decent in other matchups, notably for its ability to check DD Dragonite. As insanely offensive as Black and White 2 was, Sandstall always persevered, and Heatran was a significant reason why, capable of withstanding so much defensively while also giving these teams enough bite to actually hit back. Its influence at the success of these teams was such that eventually Sandstall stopped using Heatran as their Stealth Rocker and started using Earth Power on it instead, solely for other Spadef Heatran on opposing Sandstall. That's how big of a deal it was. Heatran wasn't just good because it devoured special moves all day, and it really did. In fact, it even had defensive use against rain teams because of how thoroughly it ruined Calm Mind Jirachi. But it also stepped in against a number of physical attackers, most notably Swords Dance Scizor, but it also withstood 2 outrages from Choice Band Kyurem Black. Of course, it gave a massive advantage over the largely weak, passively bulky Pokemon found on most teams, like Amoonguss and specially defensive Jirachi. Heatran pretty much always put in the work for you. Even against physically offensive and Dragmag teams, it was wonderful for denying late-game outrage spam from Scarf Salamence or Garchomp. As Black and White 2 went on and the metagame shifted, offensive Heatran began to experiment. Sun teams began using Flame Charge on it. Suddenly, it was just as threatening a late-game sweeper as Volcarona or Venusaur. Meanwhile, Sand teams notably saw it drop Air Balloon and HP Ice in favor of Grass Gem and Hidden Power Grass. This allowed it to not just forcibly crush Politoed and win the Weather War, but also made it a fantastic partner to physical attackers like Terrakion, Garchomp, Landorus, Therian, Excadrill, and Mamoswine, bolstering their matchups against opposing Sand. The gem-boosted HP Grass would shred through Pokemon like the Slow Twins, Jellicent, Gastrodon, and Rotom Wash. Offensive Substitute Protect sets also became incredibly irritating irritating, especially when running enough special defense so Road and Wash couldn't break their substitutes with Volt Switch. This allowed Heatran to easily, safely stall out its Hydro Pumps and proceed to annoy everything else with its Lava Plumes. When the metagame eventually shifted to an emphasis on sand teams with resilience in the face of passive damage, with Pokemon like Gliscor and Reuniclus at the forefront, bulky Heatran took a step back. An offensive Heatran stepped forward, delighted, as it was one of the biggest threats to such teams. Sure, Gliscor and Reuniclus could eat up Heatran's Lava Plumes without fear of burns, but they were torn apart by max special attack Magma Storms or Fire Blasts. Such teams would have to resort to using Tyranitar to not collapse under the pressure of Heatran's assault, and any damage Tyranitar sustained was beneficial for the Latios or Heatran's team. And so once again, Heatran was an incredible defining piece throughout the entirety of Gen 5 OU. Also once again, Heatran was superb in Ubers. It effectively reprised its role from Gen 4, but with several distinct changes. Just like in OU, it loved having Ferrothorn around both on its side and on the opposing team, and in a similar vein, it enjoyed the presence of Arceus Grass. Most Arceus forms were generally just more Pokemon that didn't want to switch into Heatran's Lava Plumes, and that was before Black and White 2, where Heatran notably stood in the way of the new Tier King Genesect, while also preventing Choice Band Ho-Oh and its newly acquired Regenerator from effortlessly spamming its stab moves all over the place, since it didn't even fear a burn from Sacred Fire. Heatran's defensive use was so valuable, in fact, that it even got used on rain teams. Once again, it was a superb Uber Pokemon. Heatran wasn't around to be in the limited Unova-only Pokedex of VGC 2011, but it came roaring back in 2012 to firmly establish itself as the format's premier fire type. Its resistance-laden typing let it devour attacks from a huge portion of the tier, including the enormous advantage it had over other fires like Volcarona and Chandelure, as well as its dragon resistance and ability to destroy the ever-present Scizor, to name but a few examples, giving it plenty of opportunity to strike with its own menacing offensive onslaught. But Heatran could also opt for the higher risk and higher reward of Eruption. It was also easy to facilitate conditions for Heatran to become even more threatening. Its favorite partner was Cresselia, which could turn Heatran's lower speed into an advantage with Trick Room, completely flipping matchups against would-be answers. Skill swapping Levitate onto Heatran was also an excellent strategy to make it ground immune as opposed to quadruple weak. Crest could also power up Heatran even further with Helping Hand. Speaking of powering Heatran up, it was of course a favorite of Sun teams. Tailwind support from Pokemon like Latios and Zapdos also helped Heatran compensate for its speed. Of course, Heatran wasn't entirely reliant on its teammates to overcome its weaknesses. Just like in singles, it could do a significant part of that job itself. For example, you might think that a fighting or ground type Pokemon or move will knock it out, but Heatran didn't just rely on teammates like Cresselia to ward them off. It could equip itself with a Chople Berry and withstand the hit itself. As the tier's defining fire and one of its best, most easily used and spam Pokemon as a whole, Heatran was a deeply fundamental part of the format, and as such was used so much that we would be better off making an HBO miniseries if we wanted to list every time it was used. Instead, we'll stick to how after dominating the regular season, Heatran finished things off when it showed up in a major way at Worlds. A substitute set was particularly popular among many top players, fully taking advantage of its huge list of resistances, as well as beautifully punishing Pokemon attempting to protect against it and making it even more easier than Heatran to dish out immense damage. In the senior division, Nitesh Manem and Aaron Zhang reached 3rd and 7th with Heatran, respectively. Runner-up Wolf Glick used Heatran as well. His supporting Cresselia also had Sunny Day, which didn't just make Heatran more threatening, but also allowed it to contend with opposing weather abilities without dedicating a team slot to Ninetales. Heatran's excellence continued into 2013. It was consistently superb once again. Its flexibility was on full display as players experimented with new variants of it. One set used by Evan Lott, en route to an 18th place finish at Philadelphia Regionals, added leftovers and a bold nature to the previously popular Sub-Protect Heatran, maximizing its ability to create and maintain as many substitutes as possible so as to wreak more havoc with Heatran's resistance-laden typing and naturally outstanding offensive output even with minimal investment. Of course, max special attack Heatran was quite possible as well, thrashing nearly everything in sight. One example was the winner of that same Philadelphia regional, Bears Fan 092, using such a Heatran that even held Fire Gem. All manner of outstanding Heatran sets were used as it dominated the usage charts throughout the season once again, even thriving in the face of the rise of Excadrill and Landorus, seeing all manner of successful placements such as Eloy H's runner-up finish at the Milan Nationals, and then Worlds came around, and Heatran demonstrated its excellence on the biggest stage once more. Brendan Zhang won the juniors division using a Trick Room team with Sunny Day and Fire Gem Heatran, with both Eruption and Heat Wave. In addition to the flexibility offered by running both moves, the power of it all meant everything apart from an opposing Heatran was getting absolutely eviscerated. Sometimes Brendan would even will-o-wisp his own Heatran with his partner Jellicent or Rotom Wash, sending his strength into the stratosphere. Heatran also won in the senior division with Hayden McTavish using a sub Heatran supported by Wide Guard Machamp, which let it substitute even in the face of an earthquaking Metagross. In the Masters division, however, Heatran really took over, as Aaron Zhang reached 3rd place with it, Ryosuke Kosuke was the runner-up with it, and Arash Omadi won the whole thing. That was a double hat trick for Heatran. It won Worlds in all of Juniors, Seniors, and Masters division, and in the Masters division, it was used on the top 3 teams. This 3 for top 3 performance outdid even Landorus Styrian. Arash's sub Heatran was particularly dangerous, supported as it was by Sunny Day Latios and Rage Powder Amoonguss. Even afterwards, Heatran continued to see success. To kick off the 2014 season that began in Gen 5, Daniel Cardenas won the Pleasanton Regionals with a Fire Gem Eruption Heatran supported by Trick Room and Sunny Day from the same Cresselia. Overall, Heatran was one of the best, most defining Pokemon in Gen 5 VGC. Early Generation 6 brings about chaos. The fog now removes Stealth Rock. There are all sorts of insane threats running around. Steals like Genesect, Aegislash, and Mega Scizor. Fires like Talonflame, Volcarona and the Mega Charizard. Fairies like Mega Mawile and Mega Gardevoir. The metagame is fast-paced and chaotic. Where do you find balance? None other than good old bulky Heatran, of course. And sure, it got nerfed as Steel types no longer resisted Dark and Ghost. Furthermore, Magma Storm's base power was weakened from 120 to 100. However, this was far outweighed by several other changes. First, Heatran didn't just gain a fairy resistance by virtue of being a steel type. It gained a quadruple fairy resistance by virtue of being both steel and fire. Second, several moves like Hidden Power, Thunderbolt, Surf, Hydro Pump, and even Draco Meteor had their base power weakened, meaning Heatran was far better at tanking them. Rotom Wash's Hydro Pump was utterly laughable at this point, for example. Third, Magma Storm's residual damage was buffed to 12.5%, which was utterly huge. If Magma hits a bulky resist, it's not only going to make such a difference if it's 120 or 100 base power. 12.5% residual damage, on the other hand, is absolutely enormous, especially in conjunction with Protect. As such, Heatran was once again one of the most consistently reliable, sturdy defensive and utility Pokemon in the metagame. It started out with its classic special defensive sets, allowing it to best handle Focus Blast from Pokemon whose other moves it could pivot into, like Thundurus, Mega Charizard Y, and Gardevoir. Then responding with Toxic and Protect, which also allowed it to deal with other Pokemon it commonly squared off against, like Rotom Wash and Talonflame. Furthermore, it was excellent at getting and maintaining rocks. Not only did no Defogger want to face off against it, it actually switched into them. Both Latias, Zapdos, Skarmory, Mandibuzz, none of them would safely stop Heatran from getting Rock Sub. As always, once it was in, switching into Heatran was a major pain thanks to the natural power and solid burn rate of its Lava Plume. This eternally reliable set was Heatran's standard throughout X and Y. Then in ORAS, it began running speed investment as a response to the fast offensive Mega Scizor that had popped up specifically to outrun Spadef Heatran at the end of X and Y. And suddenly, Max Timid Heatran became the standard. By doing so, it also forced Excadrill to stop running Adamant and began running Jolly, therefore making it weaker just by existing. Instead of Protect, this Heatran started running Taunt, allowing it to stifle Calm Mind Clefable while also letting it mess with the likes of Chansey, Slowbro, and Mega Latias. This set was a staple in all sorts of bulky offense and balance teams for its game-to-game consistency. As the player base realized that the Foggers weren't actually good at stopping spikes, it once again paired up with Ferrothorn and brought their monstrously effective passive damage walling combination back with a vengeance. And the playstyle was so effective it came to define a significant period of ORAS. Plus, with the release of Contrary Superior, Heatran's defensive place in the tier just got more and more important. Scarf Heatran also saw some popularity, mostly because its fast Stone Edge allowed it to actually check Mega Charizard Y, as well as taunt variants of Talonflame. The speed also allowed it to keep up with the faster threats in the tier. Notably, it completely turned the tables on its matchup against Landorus Incarnate and Mega Metagross. Sadly, the set's lack of longevity held it back. However, what was one of the biggest threats to the powerful spike stacking teams that defensive Heatran had helped make popular? Offensive Heatran, of course. It sliced through them mercilessly, trapping its targets with Magma Storm, preventing Waters or Clefable from healing the damage off with Taunt, before proceeding to take advantage of their lowered health with a teammate or beating them down itself. Unless the answer was especially defensive Gliscor expecting a bulky support support Heatran set, in which case Heatran just effortlessly put it away with Hidden Power Ice. This set was excellent against offense too. Rotom Wash quickly got put into range of Heatran's terrifying teammates like Specs Keldeo and Mega Metagross, while Tank Garchomp got blasted away by Hidden Power Ice. Overall, Generation 6 was Heatran as its least flashy, but it was always there, always shaping the metagame around it and eternally consistent in getting the job done, whether it was on offense, defense, or as it was often, on both. Heatran continued its Uber's excellence in XY. No other Pokemon so thoroughly punished you for not being able to touch it. If you couldn't do so, Heatran would stick around and harass you forever. This concept was on full display against X and Y Uber's balance teams, anchored by passive Defog Arceus forms. Heatran would switch in and proceed to go berserk with Lava Plume, especially since Taunt would block bulky Xerneas' attempts to use Aromatherapy. With said Xerneas set of course being another staple of such teams, Heatran just completely stifled. So too did Heatran fully take advantage of the common steals used to fend off offensive versions of Xerneas, those being Klefki and Mega Scizor. Heatran was effective against offense too, able to leverage its typing against moves like Yveltal's Oblivion Wing and Ho-Oh and Xerneas' stabs to great effect, while not being afraid of Mega Gengar. Sadly, when Orez came around and brought Primal Groudon with it, Heatran just couldn't fit anymore. Primal Groudon wasn't weak to Xerneas' Focus Blast and was just so much better overall, and teams got a lot faster and more aggressive, meaning the passive damage Heatran had picked apart so well was now a thing of the past. Still, at least X and Y Heatran was legit, and then some. Once again, the first VGC season of the new generation used a limited Pokedex, so Heatran missed out on 2014. And also, once again, it returned the year after to define the dominant metagame. 2015 Heatran's power and influence, like other VGC legends such as Landorus, Therian, and Thundurus, couldn't be overstated. It matched up so well against so many Pokemon thanks to its incredible defensive profile, as well as how easy its few weaknesses were to support with teammates and tactics like its most common item, Shuka Berry, which was particularly useful for allowing it to take not just opposing Earthquakes, but opposing Heatran, and thus it had all the opportunity in the world to bludgeon opponents offensively. Predictably, Heatran instantly started seeing massive usage and success, kicking things off with Aaron Trailer and Wolf Glick's wins at the Missouri and Florida regionals respectively. Joe Nunziata also used Heatran en route to winning the seniors division at the Missouri regionals, demonstrating the power of a rare but highly effective Life Orb set, which made great use of the coverage, neutral, and super effective, like Heatran's secondary stab Flash Cannon. The success of these players and the instrumental role Heatran played in their wins quickly and firmly demonstrated to the rest of the player base that Heatran was not just a threat, but one of the most essential Pokemon in the format. Thus, as the season progressed, Heatran continued to find success, with Riley Factura's win at the Seattle Regionals, Marcus Steffen's win at the German Nationals, and Francisco Pardini's win at the Italian Nationals being particularly notable. However, the shift to the next significant stage of the metagame, a change of seismic proportions, took place at the Japanese Nationals. There, a player named Shoma Honami won the tournament using a Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, Therian, Kangaskhan, and Charizard Y. When you take the first letters of the first 5 Pokemon of that team, CHALK, you spell out the word chalk. And this was significant because these 5 Pokemon together established themselves as an incredibly solid foundation for a team. Wonderfully complementary on offense and defense alike, made even better that you had a 6 Pokemon to slot in that made them even better. The rest of the world began copying this strategy, as well as other innovators by the Japanese, though they never quite caught up to them, as Worlds would later prove. Regardless, Chalk quickly established itself as the defining team style of the metagame worldwide, with Heatran of course being integral to its success. Its weaknesses beautifully supported by Cresselia, Amoonguss, and Landorus Therian. Tremendously synergistic pairings capable of taking on just about anything one could throw at them. And the defensive integrity of these Pokemon made it easy for Heatran and Mega Kangaskhan to blast through opponents. Slotting in Mega Charizard Y in Chalk's 6th slot, as Shoma did in his landmark win, made Heatran even more easier to use by virtue of the sun strengthening it and nerfing its water weakness. Heatran was so good, it could and did run pretty much any set to great success, but players tended to particularly favor Shuka Berry variants. Letting it tank ground moves was particularly valuable and making it even more difficult to deal with for opponents. After all, it resisted so much, but now even its most prominent weakness wasn't guaranteed to deal with it. Chalk was of course far from the only successful team style Heatran was used on, but it shot its usage up to even higher levels. It continued to have the highest level of success, with top 4 to runner-up placements strewn about every tournament there was, and as well as more overall wins like Holland here at the Madison Regionals. Then Worlds came around and Heatran once more shown on the biggest stage. It featured prominently on Shoma Honami's Worlds winning team, which was a chalk build with Thunderous at the last. Heatran wasn't just there for show and team preview either. It was one of the Pokemon Shoma most repeatedly chose for the battle themselves, and it was well supported by Amoonguss that set up Sunny Day for it. Heatran also featured on several other of the highest ranked world teams. Chalk and no chalk alike, it was used by a stunning 6 out of the top 8 players, coming in 3rd with Yosuke Isagi, 5th with Daiki Moriyama, 6th with Daichi Kumabe, 7th with Hayato Takahashi, and 8th with Leos Woltersdorf, the only non-Japanese player in the top 8. Heatran was tied with Amoonguss as the 2nd most used Pokemon in this top 8, coming in only behind the 8 out of 8 Landorus Therian. Other non-Megazord Y fires were used, of course, with Volcarona and Entei also featured notably, but none could match the reign of Heatran, one of VGC 2015's most elite Pokemon. Sadly, Heatran pretty much disappeared from existence in the restricted metagame of 2016. Trying to get it to work in a tier dominated by both Primals as well as Mega Rayquaza and Xerneas was largely not worth it. The single placement that exists is Raul Ramirez, coming in 4th with Heatran at the Ecuador Regionals. Well done to them for making it work, but they were the only ones. Still, Heatran's utter dominance in 2015 meant that despite only being significant in one of the 3 years of Gen 6 VGC, it was still one of the format's best Pokemon overall. Heatran was elevated to astonishing new heights in Generation 7. Sure, the burns it dished out now only did 6.25% per turn, but that was minor to the point of being inconsequential in comparison to the destruction it wrought. Its perpetually important defensive profile was bigger than ever in staving off the terrifying stabs of several of the biggest new threats, Magearna, Kartana, Tapu Lele. This defensive profile was bolstered by the addition of Tapu Bulu, whose grassy terrain provided Heatran with invaluable passive recovery and weakened Earthquake. However, what really launched Heatran into the stratosphere was the addition of Z-moves, which made it an even more ferocious offensive threat than it already was. The popular choice early on was Gracium Z, which bypassed Solar Beam's charge turn and strengthened it, regardless of weather, into a monstrous Bloom Doom that shredded would-be checks like Tapu Fini, Rotom Wash, and Tyranitar. What made it even nastier is that it was made even stronger by grassy terrain, which allowed it to smash through even bulky neutral targets like Zygarde and Garchomp. Heatran didn't need a Z-Crystal to be a powerful wall breaker, of course, and it was especially given that the defining bulky water was Toxapex, a Pokemon Heatran beat down with strong, super effective earth powers, made even nastier with Taunt to prevent recover and with Magma Storm's trapping effect. Beyond its offensive sets, Heatran could and did, as always, run its classic utility rock sets as well, with its defensive prowess reliably providing much needed stability against the chaotic assortment of offensive threats dominating the metagame. As always, it combined offensive and defensive utility pretty much no matter what it did. Bulkier sets still were difficult to switch into, while offensive sets still had natural defensive value and of course had no issue supporting its team with Stealth Rock through the many switches it forced. Countering Heatran was just ridiculous. Sometimes it even ran Normalium Z nature power, which alongside Tapu Koko and its electric terrain would turn into a Thunderball that utterly crushed Mantine, which was supposedly one of the few safe checks to it. Eventually, Heatran's Z Crystal of choice shifted to Firium Z, turning its Magma Storm into an utterly obscene infernal overdrive that cooked pretty much the whole metagame. And for the first time ever, there were whispers about that Heatran was genuinely broken. This carried over into Ultra Sun and Moon, which Heatran dominated effortlessly. It was so good it had pretty much peerless moveset flexibility. Sometimes it ran both Magma Storm and Lava Plume because it was that effective at doing what it wanted. Later into Ultra Sun and Moon, players had gotten pretty comfortable checking Z Fire Heatran with the likes of Mega Alakazam, who would trace Flash Fire as well as Mega Latios, until Heatran switched into its second stab Z move, Flash Cannon, powered up into a vicious Corkscrew Crush that utterly thrashed these, while also crushing Assault Vest and Mega Tyranitar and ensuring it had an easy time plowing through Clefable. It smashed Zygarde and Garchomp for heavy damage as well. Every time you thought you had Heatran figured out, it ruined you. You thought you'd use specially defensive Mega Sableye to PP stall its Magma Storms and ensure it could never get up rocks against your stall team. Even then, it would Will-O-Wisp you, using your Magic Bounce to activate its own Flash Fire and become too powerful to deal with. You thought specially defensive Gliscor's blend of bulk and speed was enough to check the standard of modest Z-Fire Heatran, and then it went timid and outsped you. Even beating Heatran with offense wasn't always easy. It loved slotting Protect on its offensive Magma Storm sets, so if your answer was Specs Ash Greninja, as so many teams were, you wouldn't even be able to do anything without it knowing first. Though nothing ever came of it, the clamoring to ban Heatran was substantial. It was akin to its role in Gen 6 in that it was rarely flashy, but it was so good at what it did that it was considered overbearing by many. Players who consider Z moves in general to be problematic cited Heatran as one of the prime examples examples. It wasn't a fast setup threat, yet it plowed through the entire metagame with ease. Heatran was one of the most elite defining Pokemon throughout Generation 7. It was arguably its best generation yet, and that was no mean feat considering how amazing it had already been. Another new generation, another initial year of VGC with a restricted dex, meaning a season Heatran would sit out, and another return the year after. Happily using its wonderful typing alongside easy to slot support from teammates, enabling it to spam its brutal scorcher of a heat wave. It especially enjoyed the earthquake weakening and passive recovery of Tapu Bulu's grassy terrain. However, for the first time, Heatran had serious competition as a defensively capable fire type in the seemingly made for doubles intimidate spamming Incineroar, which tended to be a better choice. One easier to slot on teams against the metagame throwing around threats like the duo of Tapu Lele and Mega Metagross. As a result, Heatran wasn't used quite as much in 2018 as it had in generations prior. However, make no mistake, despite this comparatively limited role, Heatran still racked up plenty of uses and successful placements for its own advantages over Incineroar. After all, it was still a superb Pokemon in its own right. If you're going to compete with something as defining as Incineroar, you had to be uniquely excellent, and Heatran was so. Particularly the way it completely devoured other fire types like Volcarona and Mega Charizard Y. Particularly popular was a Shuka Berry variant with a bulky spread made popular by Alex Collins at Michigan, letting it reliably withstand Landorus Therian and Stomping Tantrum Mega Metagross. Using Heatran, Alex Gomez reached semis of the Leipzig regionals. Ashton Cox, Andrew Davis, and Jeremy Rodriguez made quarterfinals, and Brian Young made semifinals of the Roanoke regionals. Ryosuke Kondo reached 7th, and Joshua Lorsi reached 16th at the Nashville Open, and at Worlds, Paul Chua and Akihiro Takahashi used the same team, supporting Heatran with Mega Charizard Y, Cresselia, Landorus Therian, Tapu Fini, and Kartana to reach 10th and 20th respectively. Additionally, at Worlds, Tomohiro Seki didn't use quite the same team, but he did also use Heatran supported by Crest, Landalty, and Tapu Fini once again, while also adding Tapu Koko and Mega Kangaskhan to the mix. Koko was particularly important as his Heatran used Nature Power, which turned into Thunderbolt under electric terrain, and was boosted by Life Orb for good measure, and he reached an impressive 5th place, thoroughly demonstrating that Heatran was as legitimate a tournament presence as ever at the highest level of the 2018 metagame. 2019 and its ever-changing rule set saw Heatran retain a solid role throughout, at least at first. In the Sun series, Heatran often donned safety goggles as his item, allowing it to switch into Amunia safely. This made it superb support for Xerneas, its most common partner. Heatran continued to use safety goggles in the Moon series, but that rule set also saw it begin to use Firium Z more. If there's anything scarier than the immense strength of a Z-powered Heatran, it's not seeing it coming. Both items were pushed to the side in the Ultra series in favor of the excellent healing of Ipapa Berry, most commonly, really letting Heatran repeatedly leverage its hits-taking ability. But Heatran, true to the last few generations, wasn't used much once the metagame centered around restricted Pokemon was finally unleashed fully, sans the restrictions that had held them back in the Sun and Moon series. Before that though, Heatran saw plenty of use and success. Of course, Heatran still had to contend with competition from Incineroar, but this didn't mean Heatran wasn't worth using. It just meant that the justification needed for Heatran forced it into specific cores and teams. Most notably, how did one use Heatran when Incineroar was so easy to slap on a team? Simply use both Pokemon on the same team, of course. This wasn't the only such optimal method of running Heatran, and while it was more of a stringent set of restrictions than before, it also wasn't really that different from Chalk being the optimal place to use it in Gen 6. Still, it was a little jarring to see Heatran getting multiple high placements in a tournament with the exact same team being used by different players. It started when the late Angel Miranda reached an impressive 3rd place at the Philadelphia Regionals using a team of Heatran, Xerneas, Incineroar, Groudon, Kartana, and Venusaur. Solid offensively and utterly terrifying defensively. At the Frankfurt Regionals exactly 2 weeks later, Heatran had quite an impressive tournament with not just the runner-up position but the 3rd and 7th places as well, used by Alessio Yuri Bashkero, Matthias Suchodolski, and Bartosz Eikart respectively. What was also notable was the team they used. Each of them used the same one, and it was the same team that Angel Miranda had used at Philadelphia. Heatran's next appearance told an eerily similar tale. 1 week later at Memphis Regionals, Ian McLaughlin and Nick Navarre reached 6th and 8th respectively, both using a team of Heatran, Xerneas, Incineroar, Groudon, Clefairy, and Venusaur, which was the same team as had been used before, but with Clefairy over Kartana. A month later, Alessio Yuri Bashkero reached 7th at the Lily Special event, still using the original Kartana variant, while Alexandre Lazardi was the tournament's runner-up, also using the same team, but with Tapu Koko in the slot where Kartana and Clefairy had been used. That was the Sun series, and as the restricted Pokemon gained more utility in the Moon series, Heatran's use dwindled. But this phenomenon continued when it did get used, as at the Greensboro Regional, Joseph Costagliola and Kyle Livinghouse reached 6th and 7th respectively, both of them using a team of Heatran, Xerneas, Incineroar, Lunala, Amoonguss, and Tapu Koko. This same exact team was then used by Luca Lucignoli to reach 7th at the Bolzano special event precisely 1 week later. That was Heatran's last appearance in Gen 7 VGC, but despite its newfound competition, it remained a solid, successful Pokemon in the format once again. Once Heatran joined Generation 8 in the Crown Tundra, it instantly became one of the most defining Pokemon around again. It could no longer blast the opponent with Z-moves as they'd been removed, and it had lost hidden power as well. However, these nerfs were more than made up for by what it had gained. The lack of Z-moves and hidden power cut both ways, as the removal also wound up making defensive Heatran more difficult to break through. Most notably, it became a hard counter to Volcarona. Plus, with Gliscor not being in the game, Heatran's Lava Plume and Toxic combination became among the most effortlessly obnoxious in the game to switch into, and it prompted a great deal of Heal Bell Dragonite to pop up in response. Plus, Heatran had also gained Heavy Slam in Gen 8, allowing it to reliably blast through Clefable attempting to absorb the status, while also countering it no matter how many Calm Minds it had accrued. Utility Heatran of all sorts was superb once again, with Rocks, with Taunt, with Protect, whatever it wanted, staving off seemingly every threat from Tapu Koko to Dragapult. It also began using Flame Body as its ability with physical defense EVs backing it up. This was a game changer, being able to punish all sorts of contact moves, from seemingly free U-turns to the stabs of the terrifying Weavile and Kartana. Heatran's bulky sets were so difficult to switch into, it seemed that it would never need to run anything else, but as it always seems to happen, its offensive sets eventually reared their heads, and the effects were volcanic. Eruption was no longer nature lock, and this was huge, with specially defensive Landorus Therian as the primary ground type. Heatran began running Air Balloon sets with Magma Storm and Eruption to completely destroy it, while also being devastatingly difficult to switch into in general, and generally packing a valuable ground immunity early on for threats like Garchomp. The balloon wasn't necessary though, and some players ran Charcoal or even Choice Specs for stupefying levels of firepower, pretty much only opposing Heatran could safely absorb, if it dared risk eating an Earth power. Later in the generation, Rillaboom's rise in popularity made Heatran even better, as it loved taking advantage of grassy terrain, and this prompted even these offensive sets to use Protect often. Not only was the extended longevity valuable, but it also helped get the most out of Magma Storm's ever-present chip. Again, Heatran was fairly simple at what it did, but it was so absurdly consistent at doing its thing that it didn't matter if you knew what was coming. It was gonna do it regardless, and you had to hope it didn't catch you off guard, lest its eruption reduce you to ashes. Heatran not being released until the Crown Tundra meant it missed out on the initial wave of Gen 8 VGC, as had become its norm. It returned in Series 7 with its reliable Shuka Berry Heat Wave focus, though in Series 8 it began opting for Life Orb more often. But Shuka was always its most popular item by far, and Heatran almost never deviated from it in Series 9. Heatran again saw a smattering of successful placements despite competition with Incineroar being fiercer than ever, as well as having to contend with other fires like Colossal and Entei. Even Sun teams often preferred solar-powered Charizard. However, Heatran was still unique in its blend of defense and offense, and was a particularly popular partner for Urshifu, the two being nearly impossible to wall together. Water types and especially bulky Pokemon that withstood Heatran were utterly obliterated by Urshifu, while Pokemon like Fairy and Flying types that threatened Urshifu wanted nothing to do with Heatran. Urshifu's auto-crit Wicked Blow also helped in the matchup against Landorus Therian. At the Victory Road Tundra Challenge, Heatran was used by Alexandre Lazardi to reach 15th, Andrew Ding to reach 9th, and Elliot Legros to reach 7th. Gui Leo Tarlo used Heatran to reach 13th at the European qualifier for the second Players Cup, while Caleb with Jensenha reached top 4 at the Oceania qualifier. Feng Tang John and Chang Xuan Hao reached 15th and 11th respectively, using Heatran at the Taipei Regionals. At the online Crown Tournament, Jun Kwan Kim tied for 7th with Heatran. At the first Spring Series Victory Road Circuit qualifier, Guillermo Castilla reached 13th using Heatran. At the second qualifier, Jose M. Cabre reached 19th. Damani Palmer reached 25th at the third qualifier. Luca Del Medico reached 8th. Damani Palmer reached 13th at the fourth qualifier, and then once again reaching 13th at the fifth qualifier. Props to Damani for repeatedly showing just how effective Heatran could be. Eve M. and Fiona Shimkovich used Heatran to reach 22nd and 10th respectively at the third Hatterene series. Kota Kawabe reached 8th with Heatran at the Japanese Nationals. Henry Lam reached 11th with it at the Asia Players Cup Hong Kong qualifier. Javier Javier Loyo reached 16th with it at the 4th Players Cup Latin American qualifier. And finally, Mia Gray, Jill, and Scarlett Andrews reached 8th, 6th, and 3rd respectively, with Heatran at the 5th Heatrans series. As you can see, Heatran's usage was a lot more scattered, which was fitting given its more specific place in the metagame. Well, relative to what it had been before. Anyway, it was a mark of Heatran's long-standing high standards that this level of viability was considered on the lower side, and even still, it remained a genuinely solid Pokemon until the restricted Pokemon came around. For all its competition, Heatran had quite a decent generation of VGC, much more than many Pokemon get in their entire careers. Heatran arrived in Generation 9 with the release of Pokemon Home, and surprise surprise, it's been excellent once again, pretty much doing its usual Heatran thing that makes it so great. The many terms it grabs each game and the excellent progress it makes in-game with them thanks to its resist, bulk, move pool, and power. But its innate great traits are now often taken to a new level thanks to terrestrialization. Terra tends to make already great Pokemon downright absurd, and Heatran is a picture-perfect example. The primary Terra type is Grass, which is absolutely ruinous for most attempts to deal with Heatran offensively or defensively. Forget smacking it super effectively with water or ground, suddenly it resists those moves, and it loses its fighting weakness too. Even after the initial surprise of turning the tables on these attempted aggressors, Heatran retains great defensive use since Grass is one of the best defensive types in the game. And what's more, it's a Grass that's immune to fire, since it of course retains the Flash Fire ability. Heatran also wields its Grass typing to terrifying effect offensively. Terra Blast absolutely destroys water, rock, and ground types far more efficiently than Bloom Doom ever could, given its ability to be used repeatedly and the stab Heatran has on it. In a way, terrestrialization helps make Heatran arguably the outright scariest it's ever been. Of course, Heatran is still superb even without Terra, whether running a more offensive or specially defensive variation, breaking through walls like Garganacl and Galarian Slowking, and checking threats like Goldengo and Dragapult, but Terra just makes it so much more difficult to deal with. It's not even beholden to Terra Grass either, further diversifying its potential with Terra Flying that lets it completely dominate the likes of Zamazenta and Great Tusk, gaining a fighting resistance and being able to smack them with a super effective stab Terra Blast. Sometimes the high-octane fast pace of Gen 9 OU can be a bit much for Heatran, especially since you can't always Terra to solve your problems, given its many other excellent teammates that also want to Terra, but that's always been the case for it against hyper-offense teams. Plus, it's just a matter of moveset adaptation. Some players have experimented with Balloon Flash Cannon Heatran to gain a non-Terra check against major threats Baxcalibur and Enamorus. Plus, Flame Body remains a fantastic option to punish U-turns hard. It's difficult to predict the specifics of how Heatran will proceed in Gen 9, but no matter what those are, if the previous 5 generations are anything to go by, it will almost surely be a successful elite OU staple once again. Finally, for Gen 9 VGC, at the time of this video, the Regulation D rule set was only recently implemented at the beginning of this month. This rule set allows the use of Pokemon you can bring over via Pokemon Home, and that means Hisuian Pokemon are here, along with, of course, legendaries like Heatran. Heatran is currently going strong, being a top Pokemon with a high usage rate. It typically runs Modest Nature so it can incinerate both opposing Pokemon with Heat Wave or destroy Pokemon with Earth Power, Flash Cannon, or Terra Blast. The most common Terra type for it being Terra Grass, so it can resist its usually 4 times weakness of ground as well as resisting water. The biggest tournament to happen so far with Regulation D was the Victory Road to Yokohama tournament that had 382 players. There were 11 Heatrans in top 32 of this tournament, with 4 Heatrans being in top 8 thanks to Ko Tsukide, Yuya Hashiba, Michael Kelsch, and Matteo Terbesi placing 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th respectively, each of them using Terra Grass Heatran with either Citrus Berry or Leftovers and 3 attacks plus Protect or Sub-Protect Heatran. It will be exciting to see how Heatran performs later in the season. And that's it. So how great was Heatran actually? Well, it was one of the best OU Pokemon of all time, having been nothing less than elite in the tier ever since it burst onto the scene in Generation 4. Its thoroughly unique typing in conjunction with great bulk ensures it's always got some sort of valuable defensive use against many of the best Pokemon around, and it is in turn one of the biggest offensive threats as well, combining superlative strength with a monstrous move pool. It's so good it was pretty much unaffected by power creep. It was the standard by which other Pokemon were judged. It even had multiple instances of excellence in Ubers. It's also been absolutely incredible in VGC. Sure, it hasn't been much in restricted metagames, and it's suffered from the presence of Incineroar, but it's also an amazingly sturdy, reliable Pokemon in its own right, and was among the most defining important Pokemon in Gens 5 and especially 6, where it was one of the defining Chalk Core. All in all, Heatran is one of those Pokemon that most certainly defines competitive Pokemon. If you want to win, you have to use the best Pokemon, those that will reliably succeed. So, Pokemon like Heatran. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed this False Swipe gaming film, The Heatran. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Heatran? Tell us what you thought about the video. If we missed anything, whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you in the next flick. It's like, Heatran is one of the best competitive Pokemon of all time. So this, it starts out with this shot, and then I put this here.
That's pretty good. Also not a lie.